Terry Kolath. I'm here today with Professor Adrienne Kerr. We've gotten to session 2 in our series this summer on the history of the United States to 1815 with Professor Adrienne Kerr.
Hello, Terry.
Hello. So now we've gotten up to the growth of the 13 English colonies. This is my favorite part.
Yes. Once the Spanish had agreed not to harass the other powers, they started to move in, and of course the French moved into the North Canada area. The French also tried to get into the southern part of North America, but that failed. They actually went into Florida, and they were destroyed by the Spanish because that was still theirs. So the French were stuck with New Orleans and the northern part of the colonies. They never wanted to develop realty. They were traders, and of course the big valuable item to take back to Europe were beaver pelts, because they made beaver hats, and they were the most trendy headwear in Europe, and that's how it started, plus wood. They didn't want to start colonies. They wanted trading posts, develop links with the Indians, and let the Indians sell them pelts up and down the Mississippi, all the way over to the eastern seaboard. The Brits had a different philosophy, and they were driven by private companies. These were not government colonies. That was to come. Initially, it was two individual companies called the London Company and the Plymouth Company, and they carved up the eastern seaboard between them, and that gave them a commercial framework for their investors to spend money on people coming to the New World, and hopefully making money and shipping goods or services or items back into England, and that it was a pure investment.
So it was an investment in the people coming over.
Yes.
And settling.
Yes.
And what they could produce.
Correct.
Ah.
It was just like a private company like Microsoft or any other private business. They had shares in a simple term, and their business was to generate money. And it was a very early concept which was used to go east to buy spices in India and the Spice Islands and bring those spices back. They were privately funded. These were not government expeditions. So it was that these privately funded colonies started up. Some were terrible failures. Roanoke, North Carolina, total disaster. Also one in Maine, failed. But the first one of success, which we all remember, was Jamestown. And that was only just a success because the conditions were horrible. The worst drought in 200 years, mosquito-infested badlands. What a terrible place to start your first colony. Unfriendly Indians, and a very badly managed group of people who all wanted to swan around in their fine clothes and get other people to do the work for them. These were private people who wanted to make money without doing any work. And it almost failed. They were all heading back to England when they bumped into in the Chesapeake Bay a resupply ship. And so Jamestown was reestablished and would have failed had it not been for a wonderful product which transformed the economics, which is tobacco. Tobacco saved Jamestown. Otherwise, John Rolfe, who we know married Pocahontas, was the backbone and allowed that colony to thrive until the Indian massacres about 20 years later, when the government took over because the company had gone bust, and they said, okay, we'll make this a government colony. So you see initially private colonies, and when they fail, government takes over.
Because they had such an investment, they couldn't just walk away.
Yes, correct. Right. And the same, and Virginia is an interesting story because that was a private company, and the House of Burgesses, which all Virginians are proud of, was the first pseudo-democracy where the settlers were given a chance to actually have a say in how their colony was being run. And for about 40 or 50 years, that concept of having skin in the game was the beginning of democracy, which then led to independence, that people believed that they should have the right to set the rules of how they lived. And of course, we choose an example of no taxation without representation, but this is an early form of they wanted to have a say in how their colonies were run, as opposed to back home, the privately owned company owned the colony, but they allowed the Virginians to be semi-autonomous because they believed that if you give people the right to create wealth and run your own show, that you work harder and you're more successful. And that's the driving force for the United States. So even in the early 1600s, the concept of American entrepreneurialism and energetic drive for wealth was embodied in those early colonies.
And that's when it started, the concept, or it continued, I should say, the concept of you do really well and we'll get some profit and take it back to the mother country.
But just imagine you are a peasant farmer in England, where all the land's owned by the crown or noblemen. You will never, ever aspire to wealth.
Right.
You may survive and your children will take over the farm, but it's owned by somebody else. Along comes one of these private companies and says, we will pay for you to go to this new world. We'll pay for you. You'll work as an indentured servant for 7 or 10 years. If you behave and work hard and survive, then you'll be given a piece of land. Now, isn't that just a huge motivation? And so people thought, where am I going to be able to afford land from in England? Let's try it in the New World. And that was the driving force. And of course, you have given land, and then if you make money from farming it, you can buy more land and more land. And so America was created. Now, of course, the problem was, as they grew westwards, they bumped into the French. The French were traders up and down the Mississippi, and the Ohio was the demilitarized zone, if you like, until the colonies decided that they want to move into the notional French areas around Pittsburgh. And the rest is history, of course. George Washington having his battles with the French, and that starting what became the French and Indian War, which was decisively won by the colonies in Britain, but at a huge financial cost. And then the question came after that, having won the war, and the French were kicked out pretty much all the way through the Mississippi, who pays for the war? And that is a different subject.
Ah, fascinating, fascinating. Okay. Hope you can join us for that section of United States history.